Hi, and thanks for joining us today. I'm your host, Jacqueline.
And I'm your host, Nicole. You're listening to the first season of Perfictionist.
Welcome to our spooky Halloween edition. Today we will be discussing the very fitting and popular duology, the Cat and Mouse Duet, which consists of Haunting Adeline and Hunting Adeline, as well as the companion novella, Satan's Affair. Today, though, we'll just be touching on Satan's Affair and Hunting Adeline. Before we begin, we would like to issue a trigger warning. These books include themes such as graphic violence and stalking between main characters, explicit sexual situations, reluctance, non-consensual sex, kinks such as degradation, gunplay, and somnophilia, and deals with subject matters such as child trafficking, child deaths, and human sacrifice.
This is our heavy spoilers episode. We will be discussing many of these themes. However, we will be leaving out all of the graphic details. If any of these themes are not for you, we completely understand. If you would like to skip this episode, we hope you take care and we look forward to seeing you in our next non-spooky edition. We will also be discussing major events that happen in both the books that we're talking about, which include some cliffhanger endings and our theories on what we think is going to happen in the final book of this kind of collection, Hunting Adeline.
Yes, consider yourself warned. Major spoilers are ahead.
I just want to put out a disclaimer that this is for 18 plus. So if you're not 18 years old, this isn't really the content for you, and you should probably ask your parents for permission before you continue on with this video. As mentioned previously, in this episode, we will be discussing Haunting Adeline as well as Satan's Affair. Both of these books are written by H.D. Carlton.
Yeah, they're super popular right now as of October 2023. So we just had to find out what all the hype was about. So the way we're going to do this is we will talk about one book at a time, starting with Satan's Affair. And at the end of the episode, we will talk about our thoughts on the collection. Well, Satan's Affair and Haunting Adeline. And then kind of like, just the collection as we see it. I think we probably will end up reading Hunting Adeline, but we might discuss it in a different type of episode that we have coming your way at some point. So starting with Satan's Affair.
What a, kind of, the name really grabs you.
It sure does. Yes.
It's like, what do you even say?
Yeah. I actually jumped into these without reading the synopsis at all.
Well, actually, I didn't read the synopsis for Satan's Affair either. But the synopsis for Haunting Adeline doesn't give you much.
Okay.
In my
I didn't read it
I'm
for
like,
either.
what is this about?
I just heard it was like a cat and mouse thing, and I was like, good enough for me. And then, So Satan's Affair is about a girl who believes it's her life's purpose to rid the world of demons. She's part of a traveling haunted Halloween fair, which is called Satan's Affair. Mm-hmm. And it provides the perfect setting for the events that take place.
Although some sites do list this as a fantasy novel, I think it's important to note that it does take place in the real world. I think that helps to kind of ground the story. At least that's my understanding, is this is happening.
Fantasy?
Okay, I was like wondering because you were making a face for anyone just listening. I was like, oh, are you like, oh, how do you think it's real? Or how, yeah. Okay, so that's why your face was like that.
No, I'm like, fantasy?
Yeah, I was equally confused. That's why I felt like it was important to mention that I'm not sure where the fantasy genre tag is coming from, personally.
So just
unless
this
I'm like
book,
not getting it.
Is Haunting Adeline also listed as a fantasy?
I can't remember if they're both listed as fantasies or just this one. I'm assuming both of them are. I don't think it would be. But on Goodreads, they like have so many tags. So it's like what the kind of genre
it was just like a tag?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
because on Goodreads it will say genre and then it has like a list of tags. So maybe it's like when people are rating it, they say what they think it is. I'm not sure how it works, but
Oh,
that
okay.
tag is under genres on Goodreads, and I
Right.
found that to be very interesting.
That's really strange. Yeah, no, it takes place in, it's not even low fantasy. It which is like Harry Potter, for example, where it takes place in our world, but there's like magical things happening. I
Hmm.
mean, I could see like Satan's Affair. I mean, um, Sibby, she thinks
Hmm.
she's hunting demons. She's
Yes.
obviously got some serious mental health problems. Like she's delusional. I don't know. She's a bit schizophrenic, I think is safe to say.
Yeah, well,
Um,
they give an actual diagnosis at the end, but I guess maybe when you're
mhm.
reading the beginning of the story and you're wondering whether or not, at one point I was like, are these actual demons? Like when I was reading the very beginning of Satan's Affair, I was like, is this a fantasy novel? Like,
Yeah,
is she fighting demons? Like that did pop in my mind. Like, I'm like, maybe she's literally a demon slayer and that's what this book's about. But
yeah,
as you find out at the end, like the ending, it kind of, it's like a halfway-ish through the book, all of a sudden there's like this shift and you're like, oh no, this girl needs help.
yeah,
I mean, throughout the
yes,
whole thing you're kind of like, this girl needs help, but like you realize
yeah,
no, like she's calling them demons but they're truly human beings.
yes. Although it's interesting to note that in Haunting Adeline, they do kind of talk about how everybody who she kind of killed was a bad person.
Yeah, she did have a sense
Hmm.
for, like, you know how
Evil.
when you just sense that people are not
Yeah. The
someone you should be around in the dark. You know what I
yes.
mean?
Yeah, she had
Like
that
if she,
sense.
and
Most
I
of the
think it
people
makes
she,
sense that she
yeah,
had that because of her upbringing.
yes, absolutely. So the setting for Satan's Affair is Satan's Affair, so the haunted fair.
Mhm.
And Sibby, or Sybil, I guess,
Mhm.
she is working in a haunted house. So
Well, she's
like a
living in the haunted house.
she's living there. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. But it's interesting the way that this haunted house is supposedly set up because she can move in the walls, so the people who are going through to be frightened can't see her. But there's like little holes cut out in the wall so she can look at them and make her
Mhm.
judgments.
It's really creepy. Yeah, because it's like a set piece. It's a moving circus. They're only, or sorry, a moving fair, and they're only in one place for 2 nights at a time. And then they end up like going somewhere else. So it's like the perfect setting for what's happening in this story. It gives
Hmm.
her the opportunity to kill her demons and then move on from the town. So she's like less likely to get caught because she's constantly moving around. But then she's also like, no one knows she's there. Like she's hiding in this dollhouse. Like she's not employed by the fair. She's just like, she's just snuck herself in there.
Yeah,
So it's like she's got to cover because like no one even knows she's exists.
yeah, pretty pretty creepy girl.
Hmm. But the setting just works so beautifully for the events that take place.
Yes. What do you think about, I thought it was quite realistic in the way that the things she was dealing with her mental health and then her outlook on like the demons and stuff like that. As the story goes on, you kind of learn that she was actually raised in a really intense religious cult, and her father was
Mhm.
the leader of this cult. um, I felt like with all the true crime, I'm not an expert at all, but all the true crime podcasts that I listen to, because I'm quite into that, it tracked really well with like the background of some really disturbed serial killers, and maybe some upbringings they may have had, and then how that
Mhm.
kind of turned them into what they became. And so Sibby's kind of background, I thought, matched that perfectly.
Yeah, no, when you understand sort of how she was raised, you're like, it doesn't justify what she does, but you have empathy or at least sympathy for the way she's reacting to the world, considering her upbringing.
Hmm.
And I think they did a pretty good job, like based off of, like, again, not an expert, but based off of what I have listened to in regards to cults, it seemed like a pretty good depiction of these, like, more brutal cults. Like,
Yeah.
obviously everything's different, or like every cult is different in how it's run, but for like a very serious, like, cult that has a very abusive leader, very manipulative leader, then I think it did a great job of kind of showing how, like, the impacts of that,
Hmm.
the impacts that can have on someone who is raised in that environment.
Definitely.
I also thought it was interesting that all her henchmen also had really tragic background stories. And not to say that everyone who has a tragic background story is going to turn out, it's obviously very much like a stereotype,
Hmm.
but I think it was being used for an effect.
Yes. Absolutely. Oh, I wanted to mention in, I think, our Verity episode, I kind of went on this like rant where I was like, "Oh, you can completely like understand why someone does something heinous." What I meant to also mention was that you can understand it without condoning it.
Mhm. Yeah, hopefully that goes without saying, but
I
yes,
hope so. But
best to
yeah, I just kind of
clarify.
wanted to mention that. I was like, you know,
Oh, goodness. Speaking of her henchmen, it is revealed at the end of the story that her henchmen are actually just mannequins. So they're, because in the different haunted houses, which is a dollhouse for the theme for the year, they have mechanical mannequins that interact with the guests going through, but then also like workers who go through and are like real people who are scaring the guests going through. And she's taken these mechanical mannequins and created storylines for them. So she's created like backstories for them, and like they're her henchmen who help her commit the atrocities that she commits throughout the story. And they're completely made up in her mind.
yeah, it's I was thinking about the end where she's kind of running away and how she needed to go like with her henchmen. And then once we find out they're mannequins, I was kind of like, was she like loading the mannequins into the vehicle, or were they just
Hmm.
kind of like imaginary, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes she's talking to nobody, but she sees them, like she's having those hallucinations or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, but it's sort of like her henchmen are inspired, or her like henchman relationships and the people are inspired by these mannequins. But then
Hmm.
at one point they also mentioned they found her DNA on they found
Yeah.
her DNA on the mannequins. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think most of it was happening in her mind, but she was physically interacting with them at certain points during the course of her time at the fair.
Yeah. So, something I want to mention about Satan's Affair. This is the first, okay, it is real gross. Okay.
Yes, we kind of been skirting past
So,
the like
yeah, I
the
want to
meat
I
of
want
it.
to just like mention, okay, it is so disgusting. This is the first time I've ever been reading a book where I actually had to put it down because I was physically becoming so nauseated. And at one point my husband was kind of like, "Are you okay?" Because I was gagging like while I was sitting there
Hmm.
reading it. Like it is really graphic. The violence is really graphic. Just, like I think probably it's more horror probably than
Yes.
thriller necessarily. And it
Hmm.
occurred to me that I think I've avoided the horror genre for most of my life. So I'm not actually sure how it compares to other horror novels with how kind of gross and graphic it is.
Hmm.
But yeah, I just wanted to mention that because I actually had to stop reading at one point during the evening because I felt so nauseated. I had to go take like some ginger.
Hmm. No, it's definitely not a book I would recommend reading in public, and it's not a book I would recommend reading late at night. It's
Yeah.
so incredibly graphic in the brutality,
Mm-hmm.
and just because what she's doing is finding people and then slaying the demon. Like, so she finds a demon, she slays the demon, and then in slaying the demon, she becomes very excited, and her
Mm-hmm.
and her henchmen then proceed to celebrate the
Yeah.
slaying of the demon. And that
Mm-hmm.
cycle happens a couple of times, and every single part of that cycle is so incredibly detailed. They
Yeah.
like nothing is left out of what is happening in those events.
And sometimes the slaying of the demon is, even though it's like you're assuming this is a demon, like I didn't know what was going on when I was reading it at
Mhm.
first. It's still like the graphic depictions of the violent ways she chooses to end their lives is pretty disturbing. So
Mhm. Yeah.
just an FYI.
Mhm. So this certainly is not a book that I don't know if I would recommend this book to a lot of people, but at the same time,
Yeah.
I found the actual kind of root of the book, or like the core of the book, like grotesqueness aside, to be
Yes.
very intriguing.
Yes. Yeah. Once I was able to get past that part,
Mhm.
um, yeah. And it's not like that the whole way through. There's just some
No.
really intense scenes.
Mhm.
I was really reluctant to pick the book back up after I became so nauseated, but thankfully that was sort of the worst of it. And then it was
Mhm.
kind of like, and then
Yeah.
it was fine after that. But yeah.
Yeah. It basically goes through two cycles. And then after that, it kind of shifts. There's a
Hmm.
tonal shift in the story, and it
Hmm.
becomes much easier to read after
Hmm.
that. Not that it's like gets happy or anything, like it's still a very
No.
brutal, grotesque book, but it's just not quite as intense.
Yes. Well, I guess since this is the heavy spoilers episode, we can just say we're talking about the two murders that happen, the two demons that she kills off.
Hmm.
So that's what we're talking about. Once she's done with slaying those two demons, and we kind of move on to other things.
Hmm.
Um, thankfully.
Yeah. And kind of as it shifts, we get introduced to a new character who pops into the story, Z.
Hmm.
And uh, they actually kind of team up and slay some demons together. But in this scene, so it's like there is another scene where people are being slain, but it's not. It's completely different in tone
Yes.
than the
Hmm.
previous ones. There's not detail. It's just more alluded to or like mentioned upon
You
versus
know
like
what's
in
happening,
it.
but not in great graphic detail.
It's kind of like
Um,
this is going on.
so I want to just talk about, because so she was saying she could smell the demons. That's how she detected them. They smell like
Hmm.
rot. And she would find, like, she would leave the people that smelled nice or didn't smell like they were rotting. And so when Z appears, she says he smells kind of like, he doesn't smell like rot, but he smells kind of smoky and
Hmm.
stuff. And I find it super interesting. Like, I have to wonder about her sense of smell, because, and how that all intertwines, because she was able to detect, like, he doesn't smell great, like he doesn't, but he's not rotting either. So it's sort of like she's like, this guy's morally gray.
Hmm. Yeah, she was oddly in tune to people's almost like their auras or something like that.
Yeah.
But she described it through their scent. So people who were like good were smelt like often like flowers or maybe like earth kind of thing. If they were like kind of starting to get less good, like super good people smelt like flowers, other people smelt more like earth, or like pine or something like that, which she didn't like as much, but they were still good. And then like the smoky kind of smells were starting to get evil, and then like rot was like pure evil.
Yeah.
And we do find out, like, because she does actually end up getting caught. She's taken to a mental health facility, and she is diagnosed with like hallucinations. So she has auditory hallucinations, visual hallucinations, and then sensory, like smell olfactory.
Olfactory. Yeah.
Yeah, hallucinations.
Yeah.
And so it's the olfactory hallucinations, which is contributing to her like smelling people and sensing their evil.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Yeah.
like that we get like a proper medical,
Diagnosis. Yeah.
yeah, like
Yeah.
explanation for what's going on for her.
Yeah.
So speaking of her getting caught or getting caught and then taken to the mental institution or mental health facility, she ends up getting pills, like she's taking pills, and she still thinks her henchmen are real at this point. And she starts taking pills, and she's like so upset because they're not there to like save her. And she's like, "No, maybe they got caught, maybe they don't care about me, blah blah blah," like justifying it. But then she's like, "Oh, I stopped taking my pills." And after that, she goes to the counselor to do her, or therapist to do her, like, mandatory sessions with her. And strange things start happening because she has now stopped taking her medication. And she has all these, like, for her, like, when she takes her medication, her psychosis stops because she is medicated. And then
Mm-hmm.
stopping taking her medication, her psychosis will eventually come back, not right away, like, because you have to get the drugs out of your system. So the twist, like the ending was like so creepy.
Yes. Yes. That poor therapist. She's in her session, and the therapist sort of starts to realize, like, she starts to suspect she's not on her medication anymore. So she kind
Mhm.
of asks her, like, are you on, like, your medication? And then there's just this kind of, like, I almost want to say it's like a fade to black where it's like Sibby is going to kill the therapist, like, right then and there.
Mm-hmm. And like one of her main henchmen appears in the room and like starts touching the therapist, but obviously it's just in Sibby's mind that this is happening. So the therapist isn't reacting at all. And like in Sibby's mind, she's like, "Oh yeah, now we're gonna get you," even though it's
Yeah.
just her. But like she's been able to take down a lot of people, just her.
Yeah.
So and then it's just like it just ends. Like
Yeah.
you don't ever find out what happens. Moving on to Haunting Adeline. Haunting Adeline is about a young writer, Adeline, who has caught the attention of a morally gray mystery man. On top of realizing she has a stalker, Adeline has recently moved into her great grandparents' Gothic Victorian house, which just the description is so awesome.
Yes.
And she discovers that it was a scene of a murder, and that has gone cold. So we
Yeah.
have this stalking storyline, but then we have this underlying murder mystery as well, which I was not expecting.
And the house itself is set like 50 feet away from a sheer cliff,
Oh,
which
the
is kind of cool.
visuals. I don't know if it was the first or second chapter, but it's just like describing the house.
Hmm.
Absolutely breathtaking. Like it's like the perfect book to read in fall, in the sense like it's just the vibes right off
Yeah.
the bat are like I feel like I have been placed upon like inside of a fall snow globe.
Yes. Yes. Oh, and there's ghosts. So
In the house. Yeah.
yeah. So it's
It's
a
a
really good
haunted.
spooky vibe.
And it's like all decorated in very like gothic details as well, like the wallpapers and just like the furniture and everything. It's just like, oh, so it's like Halloween, fall, gothic, all rolled into one house.
Yes.
So our main storyline that is kind of like the whole haunting of Adeline is between our main characters, Adeline and her mystery stalker, who at the
Yes.
like for the first, I don't know, half of the book, we don't know who he is. He's just like, I guess we as readers know who he is, but Adeline doesn't know who he is. He's
Hmm.
just like this super creepy guy standing outside her house who sees her once at a book signing and was like, she's going to be my wife, but like
Yeah. Instantly
really, really
obsessed.
takes it seriously. Like, sometimes you hear
Yeah.
people are like, I saw them and I knew I was going to marry them. And it's like really sweet and adorable. This isn't that.
Not at all. There's nothing sweet or adorable about it. What did you think about their relationship?
Um, I was so conflicted. And I think that is exactly how you are supposed to feel because
Hmm.
Adeline is so conflicted. Like every time she talks about him and kind of like just anytime we're hearing her thoughts about her situation, she's clearly disgusted by what's going on and thinks this is super wrong and super creepy, but then also kind of likes it. So
Yeah,
you're also like, I feel like as the reader, you're, I don't know, maybe it's just like the empathy of like reading about a character getting inside their head. So it's like you're kind of taking on their feelings a little bit.
for sure. Yeah.
So,
She like she mentions pretty early on she's got like this kind of weird dark twisted side to her.
hmm
She loves going to haunted fairs, like she loves being scared. We learn that being scared excites her sexually. um
hmm
so I don't know how this mystery man like knows that, but lucky for him that is the case.
hmm and he does seem to know that. Like he very early on, when we're in his perspective, he's saying like he can tell she's excited by this.
Hmm.
And very, very late in the book, he does say that if she was not showing that, he would not have like kind of acted the way he did. Like he would have like been more patient with, like not that he would have stopped. He just
Yeah.
would have waited for her to be excited about it, kind of thing, which is like so messed up.
Yeah.
Uh, but
Yeah.
like in kind of at the same time that he's stalking her, she discovers that her great grandmother also had a stalker. And she finds these journals hidden in the walls of her house and discovers like her great grandmother went through a very similar situation and fell in love with her stalker. So now
Mhm.
Adeline's even more confused because she's like, is history repeating itself? Like, I'm never gonna like. She's like, oh, I'm kind of intrigued by it, but I'll never love him. Like, this is gross and disgusting. Like,
Yeah.
the back and forth is just like, I don't know. It kept me interested.
Yeah. It was definitely a very different read.
Yeah.
I was actually at one point thinking, because his physical description, he sounds like very uh, striking and different. So
hmm
I was actually at one point kind of like, is this guy supernatural? Like,
Yeah, I'm
was
like,
he
what is up with those
previously like,
eyes?
yeah, I was actually thinking like, was he the stalker of her? Like, is he stalking these women?
Oh, like, is it actually paranormal or like
Yeah.
something fantasy going on?
Yeah, because I didn't read the synopsis, so I had absolutely no idea, right?
Reading the synopsis would not have helped that at
Oh,
all.
okay.
You would have had like,
Okay.
it's really, really not helpful
Vague.
in
Yeah.
regards to what. Yeah.
So I was actually like, is this guy like, centuries old, like stalking these women throughout the, you know,
Oh, that would have been
throughout
cool.
time? Yeah. Yeah, I thought it would have been cool. It turns out it's not, but
hmm
at one point that was kind of like crossing my mind.
Yeah, it was just very much a coincidence that they both had stalkers and like they both were living in that house because it was
Mhm.
her grandmother's house. So the stalking was happening in the same setting. And yeah,
Yes.
so I think that just kind of was the interesting little connection between the past, kind of the past storyline and the present storyline.
So, he I was kind of having a problem with him because we end up finding out that he does something very, very, very admirable as a career.
hmm
He's on hunting down like child and women traffickers, right? And infiltrating the rings of them and then essentially taking them down. And
hmm
that is like amazing. But but I couldn't understand how he could be okay with, because Adeline says no to him, but he ignores that. So,
hmm
like, I couldn't understand how he could like justify that, because I just felt like even though he could tell she liked it, she's still saying no. So yeah, I had a problem with that.
Oh no, I think you're supposed to have a problem with that for sure. Like he's a
Yeah.
morally gray character and not like Dove gray, like he's charcoal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's very close to just being like black,
Yeah.
but he's just ever so slightly. And I think his full justification is your mouth is saying no, but your body is saying yes.
Hmm.
And like to him, he's like, I don't care what your mouth is saying.
Yeah.
And I think that's like in his morally gray brain, I think that was justification enough for him to continue doing what he was doing.
Yeah. still though, like considering his line of work, I still find that so messed up. And it is messed
Yeah,
up
it's a
but it's
contradiction for
like,
sure.
I think your body can do things you don't want it to,
Hmm.
right?
Oh
So
yeah, for sure. He's
yeah.
very much ignoring like the physicality of human beings. But
Yeah.
I think she calls him out on that too. Like I think she straight up says, like, you literally save people who are being forced to do things that they don't want to do, and
Yeah.
yet you do the same thing to me. But in his mind, they're so separate. Like,
Yeah.
and how he can justify that, like to himself, I couldn't. Like that, it doesn't compute. They completely are. They're very much the same thing, but in his mind, they're separate, and he's able to
Yeah.
live with that
Yeah.
because he's like very, very thoroughly disgusted by
Mhm.
the trafficking that's going on, and like
Mhm.
so upset that people aren't like, that's a huge kind of storyline, like this thread of like, there's this horrific thing that is happening in our world and people just ignore it and turn a
Mhm.
blind eye, pretend it doesn't exist. And he's like
Mhm.
deeply, deeply disgusted by that,
Mhm.
which just adds to the confusion and the conflict we feel towards him as a character.
Yeah, because on one hand I love him and on the other hand I hate him deeply.
Mhm.
Which I think probably is how Adeline was feeling.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. But as we mentioned, there is this kind of murder mystery going on, and Adeline has this really cool friend, Dea,
Mhm.
I think, yeah, and her friend happens to be a hacker, and she works for this organization trying to take down the government. And spoiler, she works for Mystery Man, which ends up being a really cool connection. I thought, I was like right away, I was like, I wonder if they're connected
Connected.
somehow.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, and they are. But back to the murder mystery, the friend is trying to help her solve the murder mystery of the grandma, and like Adeline's immediate thing is like, oh, it was her stalker who killed her. Her stalker killed her. All stalkers are horrible. I need the stalker to be horrible and to kill her so I can like finally have enough, willpower to be like, no, this has to stop with my mystery man. And it does not turn out to be the case. Which like it was it ended up being somebody you didn't think, or for me personally, I like kind of, I thought it was going to be like, so it ends up being a friend of her husband, or like a friend of the family's, who was obsessed with her,
Mhm.
but she never returned the feelings, and then she ended up having an affair with her stalker instead. And this friend of the family finds out she's having an affair with the stalker and is so upset that she's having an affair with a different man and didn't choose him to have an affair with, that he murders her. And there is a point in the story where I'm like, I wonder if that is going to be what happens, because we meet this friend's son in like the present day, and he is just really, it's really fishy the way he's talking about the murder. Like, because Adeline goes to the son of the friend of the families, which if you could follow all that, and is like trying to get information from him. Is like, oh, like, what did your dad used to talk about my great grandma, like what did he say, blah blah blah. And his, like, the answers he was giving were completely contradicting. He's like, oh, I don't remember, I was so young. But then he'd give like the most detailed answer to the next question. I'm like, I thought you just said you don't remember. So I'm
Mhm.
like, this is fishy. Like, I don't know, what did you think about the murder mystery? Like, did you catch on to it being the friend of the family?
Mhm. So I knew exactly who it was as soon as we read that letter where Gigi and John had a big blow up and
Mm-hmm.
he accused her of cheating. And then Frank was like deeply unhappy with her. I was like, oh, Frank murdered her. He's in love with her.
Yeah, that was the first moment I was like, who is this Frank guy? But I didn't figure, like, I didn't think he was for sure the guy until the conversation with his
Well,
son, Mark,
he was
later.
always such a shoulder for her to cry on. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, that's a really unusual like role for another man to play in someone's marriage. So I was like,
Mm-hmm.
he is in love with her. And then, yeah, as soon as he was like really unhappy about that accusation, I was like, oh, he's the murderer. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think that it was done well enough, though, that like, I don't think everyone would pick up on it as quickly as you did. maybe I'm just saying that to justify me not picking it up right away.
Oh.
But but I think it was like done where you were still like, for the most part, probably most people were probably still like, oh, it could be this person, it could be that. Like they were leading you down, like, oh, it could still be the stalker, and it could like.
Yeah, no,
But then when you
totally.
find out who it is, it's like, oh, that makes complete sense.
Yeah, totally. Like I was like, oh, it's this guy. But like I guess all the time and quite often I'm wrong. So I just happened to be right that time.
But
It's
that's the
not
fun
a
thing, is to guess.
yeah, exactly. I have to
Mhm.
admit, like at first I wasn't super interested in the murder mystery, but then as the book went on, I was like, oh, this is actually very interesting. And I kind of got
Mhm.
sucked into it. I liked that kind of subplot. That was a good subplot.
Yeah, I think it was necessary to have some subplots in this storyline. If it was just the main storyline, uh, I think that would have gotten tedious very
Yeah.
fast.
So I found it also very eyebrow quirk worthy when when they were kind of telling each other they loved each other
Hmm.
because they were very much like in lust. He was like kind of trying to explain to us that like, oh, he's gonna force her to fall in love with the worst parts of himself, but it's kind of like the worst parts of himself are like just this really forceful man who isn't gonna listen to her say no. But it's all sex though,
Yeah.
sexual. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Their relationship is not a healthy one, that's for sure.
I started to enjoy the book a lot more once they started hanging out, other than just him stalking her and then
Hmm.
doing sexy things and then stalking her again. Once, like, it was actually like that scene where he and Mark end up going to that same restaurant that she was at or
Hmm.
whatever. And they started to see each other kind of outside of the stalker situation. I started
Hmm.
to enjoy reading about them a lot more,
Yeah.
and seeing them kind of work as a team and have some other kind of interaction other than sexual.
No, I 100% agree. And I do think in the scenes where she's like comforting him, like when he has a like bad day at work
Hmm.
and he goes there, and it's like he's not going there because he's like wanting to stalk her. He's like going there for comfort. I think
Hmm.
that's where you're starting to see like, okay, this could potentially turn into an actual relationship if he wasn't so creepy. And I do appreciate that she calls him out, like when they started being more like, I guess, in a relationship more
Hmm.
versus him just like stalking her. She even said like, why are you still being creepy? Like, I'm kind of
Hmm.
like agreeing to this at this point, so like you don't need to be this weirdo anymore.
Yeah.
And like,
Yeah. I wish we had gotten more of those tender moments between them, but
mhm,
I'm glad that we got at least the one, and there is a sequel. So,
yeah.
right.
I think that just like hopefully is like showing like how their relationship is going to kind of progress, like well it will like showing that like there is a chance that this can become like a healthy relationship where they just have this, certain way they like to engage sexually, which like she likes to be chased and he likes to chase, and like so
Hmm.
even in the scenes where they are consensually agreeing to engage, then like she'll still like do something to upset him and then run away because
Hmm.
she wants to have those kind of moments like in the beginning, but now it's being contrived
I
versus
feel like
forced.
she would like be considered a high sensation seeker.
Yeah, well, yeah, like she's an adrenaline junkie, I guess.
Junkie. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah. I think one of the parts I was the most disturbed about in this book, or upset, I should say, both, I guess, was when they were actually infiltrating the Eternal Rebirth thing.
Hmm.
And there was a little kid that he was rescuing. Oh, that really upset me. Like tears to the eyes type thing.
Hmm. Yeah, it will. That's the thing, is like I think they did a fairly good job of not talking too much about kids when a huge portion of the book is actually about infiltrating a trafficking ring that involves
Yeah.
young individuals. So I think considering that's like a huge main point of the storyline. So it's like the kind of the third storyline in this book is Zaid's storyline, where he is infiltrating this ring.
Hmm.
And it's largely women, but also children. And so to kind of have that be such a prominent part of like his story,
Hmm.
but not talk about it too much, I was
Hmm.
very appreciative that they didn't talk about it.
Hmm.
But at the same time, like I can see why she put some in, because
Hmm.
that is what he's doing. But
Hmm.
I much preferred when it was just an adult woman, which sounds
Hmm.
horrible, but
Not,
I
no,
I
it's
don't like
understandable.
reading
It's like
about when it's
extra
children.
disturbing when it's
Yeah.
children. And yeah, that little girl that he was rescuing, and she's like, "Are you taking me back to my mommy and my daddy?" And I was just like,
Yeah.
oh, like it just, I could just imagine it being my own son, and it just really was upsetting.
Hmm. Yeah. I'm a little concerned about book number 2,
Hmm.
and we'll get to it, but partly for this reason. But we'll
Yeah.
like kind of talk more about our where we think that's going to go at the end.
Yes. Yeah.
So the crossover with Satan's affair kind of happens 60% through approximately, and I thought this was really cool in the sense that we see the exact same scenes that we saw in Satan's Affair, and we see them from Zaid's perspective. And this is where reading Satan's Affair, if you choose to do so, really kind of adds to it, because you see the scenes, especially when you're like still thinking like, oh, Sibby thought her henchmen were real. And then to
Hmm.
see the scenes from Zaid's perspective, where he's like, because he's kind of mocking her. And like, so in Satan's Affair, she's like, oh, why are you making fun of me? Why are you mocking me? And like getting all like mad at him. But then you see it from his perspective, and he's like, girl, there's no one here. Like, who are you talking to?
Yeah, he's like, "Oh, so you're crazy." And when you're
Mm-hmm.
reading that in Satan's Affair, and he's like, "Oh, so you're crazy." I'm like, "Well, I mean, yeah, she's a little crazy." But you didn't exactly know why he was saying that.
Because you didn't know that the henchmen weren't real at that point.
Exactly. Exactly.
So I really appreciated seeing it from that side. And you actually, in Satan's Affair, you actually do get to see, well, Sibby sees Adeline and her friend Dea, who also are at the
Yes.
fair. And it's just like two
Yes.
lines describing these two beautiful women walking through. And they're
Yeah.
the women, like she's trying to protect them from
Yeah. The
Zaid, but Zaid's trying to protect them from
yeah.
the cults, the Eternal Rebirth cult, who's after
Yeah.
them. So it's like all these people, and that's why they end up teaming up in Satan's Affair, and it like all comes together. And
Yeah. It was really sad how Zayd would call her like what did he call her? Demon Slayer. And she at first hated it, but then she realized like he meant it like not as a mocking
mhm.
thing. And then she was like, "Oh, he's my friend," and it's just like
Yeah,
sad.
yeah, it was really sad. And like, yeah, he did kind of. He's like, oh, this girl just needs help. Kind of
Hmm.
like, I think like in a way, like I think he would have like taken her under his wing and maybe would have like been able to help her, but I don't know. She needs a lot of help.
She sure does. So this eternal rebirth cult is a pretty big problem because
Hmm.
it's essentially this huge ring of pedophiles, um, and it's all the way up to the president in the U.S. government. So it's like
Hmm.
it's I want to say it's not just like this ring of criminals. It's like deeply infiltrated into the government. So
Hmm.
and Zayd is obviously trying to take this whole thing down, but like kind of tricky when it's all the way to the top.
So with the Eternal Rebirth cult kind of storyline, the whole point is Zayd is trying to infiltrate and take them down. As you mentioned, it's like this absolutely massive ring. So it's not like something that's just like take down this one thing and you'll take it down. But again, in connection with Satan's Affair, the four men that end up being killed in Satan's Affair are kind of sort of high up, like in. the cults.
Oh,
Not like
yeah.
super high, but
Yeah.
like mid-level maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So Zaid in Haunting Adeline infiltrates them, like pretends to be a part of their cult so he can do a ritual that he's been trying to get into. Because he's like, if I can find the source of this ritual, then I can, like, the higher ups will be at the ritual, and then I can start working my way up and kind of take them out from within. So that's kind of his storyline as things progress. So we do get to the point where he is being like indoctrinated. Is that a
Mm-hmm.
word?
Mm-hmm.
Into the cult. So he goes to do this human sacrifice, which obviously he's not actually going to do the human sacrifice, but that's like what's supposed to be going on. And then he sets it up so that they attack before the sacrifice can take place. But this is the end, and this is kind of the twist ending
Yeah.
because they know he's coming. So he thinks he's being like sneaky with this, but there's also someone else who's kind of knows that someone's come. Like, you know, it's kind of like double agents on both sides sort of situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they go to attack, but then they in turn get attacked, like his men who he sent in. So all of a sudden things are being blown up, and he's like, it's just like gets really crazy and confusing. And his like main kind of computer man, who he trained himself, Jay, comes in and is like trying to help him. And then somebody walks up behind Zaid and is like, and Jay, he knows who Jay is because he uses his full name, and we haven't heard his full name yet. So this is someone who I think is, I'm guessing, part of their organization who has turned on them
Ugh.
and like gave the cult information that they were going to be
Yeah.
attacking. And I'm like, who is this person who's turned on them? Like, that we don't know, because it just like his storyline ends there, basically being like, I don't know, taken by this person. We're not sure. He's just like, this mystery person comes up behind Zaid, and Jay's like, it's you, kind of thing.
What if it's Dea?
I was like, is it gonna be Dea? I don't like, I hate that idea so much that I'm like rejecting its existence. Because that would be just so devastating. Like, she's known Adeline for so long. And kind of one thing we vaguely mentioned, but not really, but like Adeline is being targeted by this cult. Like, they've decided they
Yeah.
want to
Yeah.
take her and sell her.
Yeah.
And so it's like for her, and Dea's apparently been her friend for years. Like, they know each other's families. Like, so if it is Dea, I would be absolutely, like, that would be such a twist. But
I think if it was Dea, it would be because they are, pardon me, they're holding something over her, not because she's like a bad person.
okay, that would make it better. But yeah, I like thought of that for a split second, and then I'm just like, no, it
I
can't be
don't
her.
want it to be.
No.
But this book has been so uncomfortable, this not just this book, Satan's Affair as well, that I actually wouldn't put it past the author to do this.
No, definitely. Yeah, it would track for sure. And
Mm-hmm.
there's more evidence that it could be Dea because in Adeline's storyline, while this is going down, she gets a call from Dea being like, I really need to talk to you. So she heads over to Dea's house, and she ends up getting run off the road and taken. And there's kind of like another little subplot of these other people, who, it's not like a super, super important subplot, but one of the people in its name is Max. And in the end, it is this individual Max who ends up taking her. So
Mm-hmm.
he's somehow involved too. But like, as you're reading it, he seems very separate from the cult. Like, him and the
Yeah.
cult don't overlap. They're in different storylines. But then
Yeah.
at the end, it's kind of like, oh, is he part of this cult? Is his father part of the cult?
Mm-hmm. I didn't think that it was Dea who texted her. I thought either Dea has been taken or someone's hacked her phone to make it look like it's her.
Mm-hmm.
I never thought
Yeah.
for a second that it was Dea who actually texted her that. But
I also had those thoughts as well. But then I'm like,
yeah.
oh, but if Dea is the one who is
Yeah.
behind this, maybe she did. I don't. So
Yeah.
I love it when you're kind of left questioning things at the end, because I
Yeah.
like to like ponder them for a while before getting the answers, which I'm
Yeah.
assuming you get in the next book.
Yeah.
So that being said, for the next book, I mentioned I was kind of concerned about it. And largely because the content of it will mainly focus around the kind of cult slash child trafficking ring or human trafficking ring. And I'm like, that is such a heavy topic. And the book is very large. So, I mean, like, it's like over 500 pages. I think that's a large book. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm like, is that going to be the only storyline? Like, what I liked about this book is that there were so many different storylines. So even though each topic was kind of hard, you kind of got reprieve from each of them as you jumped around to the
Yeah.
different storylines.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like one entire book dedicated on this storyline alone, because I'm assuming, and let me know if you have different thoughts, but I'm assuming the next book is going to be Adeline is now a part of a trafficking
Mm-hmm.
ring
Mm-hmm.
being held, and
Mm-hmm.
Zaid is going to try and save her.
Oh, absolutely.
Like,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
but I'm like, oh, I hope some other kind of unexpected side subplots
I think,
emerge.
yeah, I think there will be some for sure. Yeah, I didn't quite expect it to end on such a cliffhanger because I was like, oh, yeah, we'll finish reading this and I may or may not read the next one. And I'm like, well, now I have
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, I don't know if it's on the author's official site or on Goodreads or where, but there is an official like warning that it ends on a cliffhanger. That
Oh,
Haunting Adeline ends on a
right.
cliffhanger. So I'm like, I appreciate that. Like you're letting people know what they're getting into. Like you're
Yeah.
not just reading this book; you are reading both.
Yeah.
Just so you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Just so you know. Oh, yeah, absolutely. So do you think that little girl I was mentioning before, the one that Zaid rescued, and I was all
Mhm.
disturbed and everything about that, her name is Sarah. And Zaid had crossed his mind in the story that maybe he could adopt her if her parents were dead.
Yeah.
And I immediately like rejected that thought. he was like, "Oh, I got to talk this over with Adeline because Adeline would be her mommy." And I'm like, "You guys ready to be parents?" Like
Would you be good parents? What kind of
should
morals
maybe
would you be?
I just yeah, just given like the dynamics of their relationship and how like twisted he is, and I'm just like, I just don't feel like that's a good idea. But
Yeah. I have like two thoughts on this. Firstly, like regarding his character, I'm like, I wonder if he's gonna like. I haven't actually seen or read the last of the 50 Shades of Grey, but my understanding is that like Christian Grey kind of mellows out at the end and kind of like learns to be more less controlling and more give and take kind of
right,
thing. I could be wrong on that because, like I said, I haven't seen the last one. But I'm like wondering if that's going to be the same with Zaid, where it's like once he and Adeline have kind of like cemented their relationship, like his craziness kind of goes away, like his like mental instability around her. It's like once he kind of gets what he wants, he kind of it's just like less morally gray, if that makes sense. Like hopefully, because then like they could like because him outside of stalking Adeline seems like a pretty stand up guy.
I
It's
mean,
just his
he's
stalking behavior that's
outside the
really problematic.
stalking, he's amazing. But
Yeah. So if we take that
well,
away,
I mean,
maybe he'll be okay.
as we like sit here condoning like unsanctioned hits on people, essentially, right? But I
But I
mean, like
mean, they're
who?
demons.
They're demons. Yeah.
But in regards to if I think they'll adopt Sarah, I think it was interesting that like, cause like the little girl was like, "Are you going to adopt me?" Which I'm like, "Girl, are you giving up on your parents so quickly?" Like, I'm sorry, it's not funny, but it's like this kid's been kidnapped and told she's going back to her parents, and her first thought is, "Will you adopt me?" I'm
Yeah.
like at least check to see if your parents are alive first. Don't just like write them off.
Yeah, I don't quite.
But
It made me wonder how long she'd been in the trafficking ring for.
mm, yeah,
If she had been in there for like years and years, like maybe
hmm
she doesn't even remember her parents. Like,
or maybe like she knows that they're dead. Like maybe
yeah,
she saw
yeah,
them die when she was taken.
yeah, yeah.
But I think it was like I think it's odd for that to be mentioned if that's not kind of like a hint at what's to come. Like maybe they won't adopt this little girl, but like I'm wondering if at the very end,
Some
when everything
foreshadowing.
settles, that eventually
Yeah.
they will adopt or at
Yeah.
least have children of their own, which he seems very set on doing at one point, regardless of if Adeline agrees, which seems to be his
MO.
style.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I also want to mention, I kind of admire Adeline for admitting to herself that she kind of likes twisted stuff. Because I think people might not want to admit that side of themselves to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I could see why she'd be attracted to Zayd in the way that he sees some pretty carnal needs that she has. She's starting to admit it to herself that, yeah, this is true about me, kind of thing. So in
Mm-hmm.
a way, they're kind of perfect for each other.
Yeah.
It was just really uncomfortable kind of getting to that stage where you realize like they are pretty perfect for each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I do like one thing I kind of liked is her conversation she has with God. When she's
Yeah.
like, why did you make me like this? It's
Yeah.
like she like recognizes that her feelings are not what most people would consider normal or average. And she like questions why she feels this way, which kind of adds some humor to an otherwise pretty heavy book.
Mhm.
But it is, like you said, nice that she is acknowledging what's true for her.
I think it takes guts to acknowledge the unsavory parts of yourself.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure. That's a wrap on today's discussion. Next week, we will be jumping back to the world of Aurelia and starting our 4-part mini series for Kingdom of Ash. We'll be doing part 1. Thank you very much for joining us today.
And if you like this episode, please remember to like, share, and subscribe so you can stay tuned for more exciting book discussions. Until next time, happy reading.